I thought my marriage was perfect, until I caught my wife sneaking around with my so-called friend. But instead of crying, I made sure they both lost everything. Hi, my name is Michael. I'm 38 years old, and if you had asked me a year ago, I would have told you my life was good. Maybe not perfect, but stable. Predictable in the way that long marriages become comfortable routines, inside jokes, a shared history built over time. But looking back, I can see it now, the cracks that had been forming long before that night. The small things I ignored, the moments I brushed off as nothing. Hindsight has a way of making fools of us all. It was a Saturday autumn night, the kind that makes you nostalgic for things you can't quite name. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and wet leaves, a crisp bite hinting at the cold that was just around the corner. My best friend, Tom, had thrown together a house party, the kind of casual get-together that we'd been doing for years. Drinks, music, laughter. Nothing fancy, just an excuse to catch up with old friends. Kate and I had been invited, of course. She said she'd come later because she had some business in the city. I didn't think much of it at first. Kate's job had always kept her busy, and last-minute changes were just part of the deal. I arrived at the party alone, greeted by the familiar warmth of friends and the easy flow of conversation. Tom handed me a beer the moment I stepped inside, already tipsy and talking too fast about something his coworker did earlier that week. I laughed, nodded along, but my mind kept drifting back to Kate. An hour passed, then another. I shot her a quick text. "Everything okay?" No response. I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe she got caught up in something. Maybe her phone died. I grabbed another drink, tried to push the unease away, but it lingered like an itch I couldn't scratch. People were dancing in the living room. Someone was arguing about football near the kitchen, and outside, a group had gathered around a fire pit, talking and laughing like nothing else in the world mattered. Another hour went by. I called her, straight to voicemail. I called again. Same thing. I checked our messages. My last few texts were still unread. That was when the anxiety really started digging in, deep and sharp, clawing at my ribs. I knew Kate. She wasn't the kind of person to leave me hanging like this. Not without at least a quick message to say she was running late. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was driving, maybe she was in a meeting, maybe her phone really had died. But no matter how much I tried to calm myself down, the feeling wouldn't go away. 3 hours. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I stepped outside, away from the music and the voices, the warmth of the house suddenly suffocating. The cold air hit me like a slap, making me realize how tense I had been, my shoulders stiff, my breath uneven. I dialed her number again, gripping the phone so tight my knuckles ached. Voicemail. I didn't leave a message. What was the point? I stared at my screen for a long moment, my thumb hovering over our text thread. Something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones. I stepped out into the yard, away from the noise of the party, my breath visible in the cold night air. The music and laughter from inside felt distant, muffled, like I was in some separate, quieter world. I pulled my phone from my pocket, my fingers slightly numb, and called her again, straight to voicemail. I stared at the screen, my stomach tight. This wasn't like her. Even if she was busy, even if something had come up, she would have let me know by now. I paced the yard, glancing toward the street, half expecting to see her car pull up any second. But the longer I stood there, the heavier the silence became, wrapping around me like something alive. Then, as if on cue, headlights cut through the darkness. A car rolled up to the curb, its tires crunching over the damp gravel. At first, I felt a rush of relief. Finally, she was here. But the second I saw inside the car, that relief turned to ice. Kate was in the passenger seat, and Nate was behind the wheel. Nate, I had never liked him. There was something about the way he carried himself, too smooth, too practiced. He was the kind of guy who could charm a room full of people while making you feel like an idiot for not trusting him. He always had a joke, always had a compliment ready. But there was something underneath it all, something calculated. He wasn't a friend, not really. He was just a guy who showed up too often, a guy who never quite stayed in his lane. And now he was here, With my wife. They were laughing about something, completely oblivious to me standing there in the yard, watching. Kate's head was tilted back slightly, her eyes bright, the kind of effortless happiness I hadn't seen from her in a long time. And Nate, he had one hand on the steering wheel, the other lazily holding a drink, grinning like he owned the world. Then Kate saw me. The laughter stopped instantly. Her smile vanished, her expression shifting from joy to something else entirely. Shock, guilt, something she was desperately trying to suppress. She straightened in her seat, brushing her hair back, as if fixing herself would somehow fix the situation. Nate, on the other hand, didn't miss a beat. He glanced at me through the windshield, smirked, and lifted his glass in a casual toast. A silent, cocky acknowledgement. I felt my jaw tighten, my fingers curling into fists at my sides. He knew exactly what he was doing. Kate barely had time to open the car door before I was already walking toward her, my pulse hammering in my ears. She stepped out hesitantly, adjusting her coat like she needed a moment to compose herself. I wasn't giving her that moment. What the hell is this? My voice came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. Couldn't care. Kate sighed, exasperated, as if I was the one being unreasonable. Michael, it's nothing. Nate was just giving me a lift. A lift, I repeated, my disbelief cutting through the cold air. You've ignored my calls and texts all night, and now you show up with him, laughing like I don't even exist? How stupid do you think I am? She crossed her arms, shifting her weight like she was bracing for a fight. I wasn't ignoring you. My phone died, and I cut her off. That's crap, Kate. You could have borrowed someone's phone. You could have told me you'd be late. Instead, you're here, acting like nothing's wrong. Nate, still sitting in the driver's seat, leaned back and smirked like he was enjoying the show. He didn't even bother pretending to be apologetic. Just sat there watching. I turned to him, my fists clenched. You can leave now. He raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. With a lazy nod, he took a slow sip of his drink before putting the car in reverse. No need to be so dramatic, man, he said, flashing a grin. Take it easy. The moment his car disappeared down the street, I turned back to Kate. Inside. Now. She hesitated, her eyes flashing with something. Guilt. Maybe. Annoyance. I didn't know and I didn't care. I grabbed her wrist. Not hard, but firm enough to let her know I wasn't going to just drop this. Michael, stop. You're making a scene. I let out a bitter laugh. A scene? You lied to me, disappeared all night, and showed up with Nate, and I'm the one making a scene. She yanked her arm away, her eyes narrowing. You're exaggerating. Nothing happened. You're always so paranoid about Nate. Because I know exactly what kind of guy he is. I shot back. And you sure as hell aren't acting like someone with nothing to hide. For a second, she faltered. It was brief, just the smallest hesitation, but I caught it. She knew she was lying. I stepped closer, lowering my voice, forcing her to meet my eyes. Tell me the truth, Kate. Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't speak. That silence said everything. I wasn't going to let this go. Not this time. And I sure as hell wasn't going to let her walk away from this without consequences. Kate walked into the party like nothing had happened, smoothing down her coat and forcing a smile, as if she could just slip back into the warmth and noise, leaving the tension behind. But I wasn't letting this go. Not this time. I followed her inside, my body still buzzing with adrenaline. People barely noticed us. Tom was telling some loud story in the kitchen, music pulsed from the speakers, and friends were lost in their own conversations. But for me, the whole room blurred into the background. Kate grabbed a drink from the counter, taking a deliberate sip before turning to me with forced patience. Michael, can we not do this here? I stepped closer, lowering my voice but making sure she knew I wasn't backing down. Is there something going on between you and Nate? Her fingers tightened around her glass, and for the first time all night, she hesitated. It was barely a second, but it was enough. A simple no should have come easily, but it didn't. Michael, you're being ridiculous, she said finally, rolling her eyes. You're making a big deal out of nothing. I'll take that as a yes. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. I can't believe you. I turned away before she could finish, my chest tight, my hands trembling. I needed air. I needed to get out of there before I said something I couldn't take back. I stepped outside, inhaling the cold night air, but it did nothing to cool the fire burning in my gut. My mind raced, replaying every red flag I had ignored, every excuse she had given me over the past few months. Maybe I had known deep down. Maybe I just hadn't wanted to see it. Then I heard his voice. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the moment I stepped toward the driveway, Nate's voice cut through the night, smug and unbothered. He's just jealous, he said, his tone dripping with arrogance. Because he knows I can give you something he can't. Silence. A long, heavy silence where Kate should have said something. Shut up, Nate. That's not true. Don't talk about my husband like that. But she didn't. She didn't say a damn word. I felt something inside me break. Not with rage, not with grief. Just with the cold, clear realization that I had been fighting for something that didn't exist anymore. Maybe it hadn't for a long time. At that moment, standing in the dark, listening to my wife's silence, I knew this marriage was over. I sat in the dark for a long time, the house feeling emptier than ever. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. My hands rested on my knees, fingers twitching slightly, my mind replaying the night over and over like a movie I couldn't turn off. Nate's words, Kate's silence. The moment I had walked away from that party, I knew there was no fixing this. No apology, no excuse could erase what I heard, what I felt. But knowing something and accepting it were two different things. I needed proof. Not for closure, not to convince myself, but because I refused to be the fool in this story. I stood up slowly, my body heavy with exhaustion, and walked toward the closet in the office. Somewhere in there, under a pile of old papers and forgotten junk, was Kate's old laptop. She had gotten a new one about a year ago, claiming the old one was too slow. She never got around to throwing it out. When I found it, dust coated the screen, the keyboard sticky in places from spilled coffee or time. I plugged it in, sat down, and waited. It booted up sluggishly, the old system groaning to life. But it didn't matter, because when I clicked on the mail app, she was still logged in. And that was when I saw them, over 80 emails from Nate. At first, I just stared at the number, the weight of it pressing down on me. Then slowly I clicked. Flirty messages, inside jokes, talks of our evenings at a hotel. Some messages were short and teasing, others long and filled with details I didn't want to know. But each one chipped away at the last remaining pieces of denial inside me. Then I saw one from 2 weeks ago. Subject line, last night. I clicked on it, my pulse roaring in my ears. The email was brief. Had an amazing time with you, as always. We should do that again soon. Maybe next weekend. Attached was a photo. I clicked, and there they were, sitting in a dimly lit hotel lounge, glasses of expensive wine in front of them. Kate's head was resting on Nate's shoulder, her smile soft, intimate. She looked happy, relaxed, like she belonged there, not with me. The anger that had been simmering inside me all night burned into something colder, sharper. I had my proof, and now I was going to make sure she regretted every second of it. I spent the next day gathering everything. Every email, every message, every transaction that painted the picture of their betrayal. It wasn't just about proving Kate had cheated. It was about making sure neither of them could lie their way out of it. Bank statements showed charges at high-end restaurants I had never been to, spa visits, and, of course, multiple bookings at the Westford Hotel, the same place where Nate's company held its corporate events. Tom, who had been my friend for over 20 years, helped me dig deeper. He was just as furious as I was, not just because of what Kate had done to me, but because he had never trusted Nate either. Through a contact, Tom found out that Nate's company was hosting another corporate event at the Westford that evening. A formal gathering, the kind that involved high-ranking executives, clients, and a lot of reputations on the line. And like clockwork, Nate and Kate would be there. It was the perfect opportunity. That night, Tom and I arrived early, blending in with the crowd. Suits, drinks, polite conversation, we played our parts while I waited. My hands were steady, my mind sharp. I wasn't nervous anymore. I was ready. Then, just as expected, I saw them. Kate and Nate walked in together, her hand lightly brushing his arm as they laughed at some private joke. They looked comfortable. Too comfortable. I let them enjoy themselves for a while, let them believe they were untouchable. Then, when they slipped away toward one of the private rooms upstairs, I followed. The hallway was quiet, dimly lit. I took out my phone, pressed record, and walked up to their door. Then I knocked. Silence. Then shuffling. Another knock. Harder this time. More movement. Then finally the door cracked open. Kate's face drained of color the second she saw me. Behind her, Nate was buttoning his shirt, his confusion shifting into irritation. "Michael," Kate started, her voice shaking. "Smile for the camera. Lovebirds," I said, holding up my phone. "This is going to be very interesting for your boss." Nate paled, his bravado crumbling in an instant. Kate looked like she wanted to disappear. I had them, and they both knew it. I sent the video to Nate's boss the next morning. No explanation, no warning, just the raw, undeniable truth. Less than 24 hours later, he was fired. From what Tom told me, the fallout was brutal. Nate had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, building the image of a respectable businessman. But his company had a strict policy against workplace affairs, especially ones that involved using corporate events for personal rendezvous. His superiors didn't hesitate. He was gone without severance, without a reference, without dignity. Next was Kate. I wasn't about to let her rewrite the narrative or play the victim. I told everyone, the people who mattered, her friends, her family, everyone who had once respected her. Some were shocked, others refused to believe it at first. But then I sent them the proof. Screenshots, emails, the hotel receipts. There was no room for denial. Her parents were devastated. Her mother called me, crying, apologizing over and over like she was responsible for Kate's actions. Her father, a man who had once proudly walked Kate down the aisle, barely spoke. His disappointment said more than words ever could. Her friends split into two camps, those who defended her, claiming mistakes happen, and those who wanted nothing to do with her. The latter group was larger. That night, my phone rang 23 times. Kate called, then texted, then called again. Apologies, excuses, desperate pleas to just talk. I didn't answer a single one. The woman who had spent years building a comfortable life, who had always prided herself on being in control, had lost everything in a single night. No family, no friends, no financial security, just the wreckage of her own making. I sold the house, the place that once held memories of love, laughter, and promises now felt like a graveyard of broken trust. I didn't want to wake up every day in a home where every room reminded me of Kate. So, I got rid of it, every last trace of our life together. Within a month, I moved into a modern loft in the city center. Sleek, minimalistic, full of light. It was mine.
No ghosts, no baggy.
Just a fresh start. For the first time in years, I focused on me. I went out more, traveled for work without feeling guilty, started hitting the gym again. There was no one to answer to, no one to explain myself to. Felt good. Damn good. 3 months later, I met Olivia. It wasn't planned. I wasn't looking for anyone. But life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. It happened at a bookstore, some cliché moment where we reached for the same novel at the same time. She made a joke about it, and before I knew it, we were talking like old friends. She was different, witty, confident, the kind of woman who didn't play games or pretend to be something she wasn't. With her, everything felt easy. For the first time in 7 years, I wasn't overanalyzing every word, every action. I didn't feel trapped. I didn't feel obligated. I just felt free. One evening, I received a letter from Kate. It was long, full of apologies and confessions. She admitted her mistake, admitted she had ruined everything. She said she had lost more than she could have ever imagined and that she still hoped, somehow, that I could forgive her. I read it once, then tossed it into a drawer and forgot about it. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I felt nothing. That's when I knew I had truly moved on. This whole experience taught me one thing. Never let anyone destroy your dignity. When you are betrayed, don't cry. Don't beg. Just turn around, prove your worth, and move forward. Because in the end, revenge isn't about getting even. It's about living better. And that's exactly what I did.